This is Nathan Fantasy Football League Updates. Today, we unveil the number 17 in the preseason polls. Let's meet their team, talk about my predictions, and more next. Nathan Fantasy Football League Updates. Welcome back to another episode, and we are ready to go for the number 7 team in the preseason polls. That is right, the 10-man, 2-quarterback PPR and punter league here on the Nathan Fantasy Football League Updates. So, we've already unveiled the 10-seeded Rocky River Rough Riders, the 9-seeded Bay City Bunnies, and now the 8-seeded Grand Rapids Groundhogs, 2 AFC teams in the Bunnies and Groundhogs, and 1 NFC team in the Rough Riders. And surprisingly enough, we're coming back with another AFC team. That is right. But before we announce the next AFC team, I will highly encourage you to like and subscribe and comment down below. After, you've watched this video through, let me know what you think of my opinions on this team. Do you think some teams below it should be higher than this team? Do you agree or disagree with some of my picks? Just let me know. And let me know in the comments who you are rooting for so far. You've been introduced now after this video to 4 teams. So let me know out of those 4 who is your favorite. But let's waste no more time. Sliding in at the number 7 ranking, the highest they've ever been in the preseason polls, it is the Zestmeisters. That is right, the champion from our 8-man fantasy league before it became 10-man is now ranked as high as the 7th ranked team in the preseason polls. He has never been above the 9 spot in my preseason polls the past 3 seasons. So finally making the jump, and I think this team actually has some solid potential, which is surprising because over the years, this is a team that has finished at the bottom of the league more often than not. But I think this is a team that could make some noise. Obviously, they're 1 spot out of our 6-man playoff, but in my opinion, a weaker AFC, this is a team that could find itself into a playoffs. The battle, I really think, between the Bunnies, the Grand Rapids Groundhogs, and this team, the Zestmeisters, could be so much fun. The Zestmeisters at number 7, let's meet the team. Obviously, they picked at number 1. They had the number 1 overall pick, so obviously a big weight between their picks of 1 and then 20. They made no trades on draft day and just stuck and picked, and honestly, that really worked out. This is the first team that didn't make a trade that is, on our preseason poll. And I liked some of the teams that just stuck and picked. They didn't make trades. So let's meet the Zestmeisters, and we'll start with their quarterbacks. They went quarterback pretty early with that 20th overall pick. They snagged Lamar Jackson. That's right. Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP, is back in the league, and he is going to dominate for the Zestmeisters. I really love this pickup. It's a consistent score. He's got the rushing upside. We know what Lamar Jackson brings to the table, and you just love that staple of a quarterback in your room because that is a top 5 quarterback, and I think you can almost, punch that ticket in because it is such a lock that Lamar Jackson is going to rush for a couple 100-yard games, and obviously he's going to dish out the ball well. The Ravens offense is molded around this guy. So honestly, love the pickup of Lamar, and you balance it out with another really solid quarterback. You go Kirk Cousins. That's right. Kirko Chains is a member of the Zestmeisters this year, and I once again love the pick. I think obviously, a new home in Atlanta, and obviously Michael Penix Jr. was drafted with the 8th overall pick in this year's draft by the Falcons. So obviously Kirk could lose his job at any time because Penix is obviously going to develop under him, but we know the age is getting up there for Kirk Cousins, and he's coming off a pretty bad injury with the Vikings. And so, how does that factor in? Is he fully recovered? Does the ball still come out the same? We will find out. But at the moment, I think Kirk Cousins is a safe pick. He's got some solid weapons. Obviously, they're going to rely on Bijan Robinson in the run game, but also in the pass game. And then you also add in Drake London and Kyle Pitts. I really like Kirk Cousins' ability to move the ball around. We know Kirk Cousins loves to use his tight end. As we saw in Minnesota, he loved to dish it down to TJ Hawkinson. And then, obviously, the number one option being Drake London. We saw how well he played in the Vikings offense, but that is designed more for Justin Jefferson. So obviously Kirk will have a little bit more freedom with who can throw the ball to, really. And so we get past the quarterbacks. That's a pretty solid room. I'd say it's, at least in that 5-6-4 range, the middle of the pack in that quarterback room. And that brings us now to the running back room. At number 1 overall, no surprise, he goes Christian McCaffrey. CMC, for the second time in our league, has been drafted number 1 overall. In year 1, he was also the first player off the board. Didn't quite work out the same, and we'll see. Obviously, as I record this today, Christian McCaffrey has been listed. He will miss the preseason and a couple weeks of practice. So last season, he was fully healthy. It was awesome. We talked about the injury concerns with him last year. Well, he proves us wrong. He stays healthy, and now this season, he starts the preseason by getting hurt. So, will Christian McCaffrey's health come back to haunt us? We'll find out. If he stays healthy, he is the best player in fantasy football. He scored over 20 touchdowns. He had incredible rushing yards. He can really play in the pass game. Christian McCaffrey is by far the best player in fantasy football if he can stay healthy. So you cannot complain about this pick. So already the 1, 2, and 3 file out great for the Zestmeisters. What keeps them low? And I don't think it's their running back, too. They go out and get Kenneth Walker III out of the Seattle Seahawks. K9 comes in as a great running back. I had him last year, and, obviously some weapons passing the ball within the Seattle offense, but Kenneth Walker still gets a ton of touches. The only thing you have to worry about is Zach Charbonnet behind him. Charbonnet, obviously, last year was rumored that he was going to take a ton of Kenneth Walker's touches. He didn't really do that, which was awesome for Kenneth Walker's fantasy value, and I love him here as your running back, too. I think it's a great, safe pick, and obviously he's got some great upside. He had some 20 to 30-point games. I think Kenneth Walker is a solid running back, too. So only positives so far for the Zestmeisters, but then we get into the receiving room, and that's where things are a little bit more sketchy. Your wide receiver 1 this year is Chris Olave. You took him with that back-to-back start of the 3rd round pick, and I don't hate Chris Olave. I think he was definitely a little overvalued, but for the New Orleans Saints, Chris Olave has been fine. I think he's a great wide receiver 2 to flex option, and I feel like, Michael Thomas now out of the building. Chris Olave is the guy in New Orleans. That's who Derek Carr is really going to have to look to throw the ball to. So I understand where the value is. I just think he was a little overvalued. I wasn't going to take him. I think he was more of a 4th, 5th round talent type of guy, but I think, he's going to be a consistent scorer. You can expect 14 to 15 points a week, obviously with the occasional 20, 25 plus point week sprinkled in there. So I like Chris Olave more as a wide receiver 2. But him being wide receiver 1, he can work past it a little bit, but this is definitely one of the lower tier wide receiving cores in the league. And you back the Olave pickup with Nico Collins. I know the Michigan man at heart, Nico Collins, had an incredible year last year with rookie CJ Stroud, and the Texans offense continues to be hyped and hyped up. However, with the addition of Stephon Diggs and how well Tank Dell broke out before his injury, I don't know how Nico Collins is going to do. I don't know how any of these Texans receivers are going to do, because you have a 3-headed monster of Dell, Collins, and Diggs. 1 week, one of them or 2 of them is going to be really good. The other 1 or 2 guys is not going to be viable for fantasy football. There's just so much going on with the Texans receiving core that I just don't know how to feel. I could easily see Nico Collins still being the top guy there because him and CJ Stroud have had a year to build connection. Same deal with Tank Dell, but Stephon Diggs is Stephon Diggs, so I'm sure CJ Stroud is going to try to get that guy the ball. Nico Collins, he'll probably be an outside receiver, and Dell will play inside. I could also see them trying to play Nico Collins in more of a slot role as well. I think, these wide receivers are interchangeable, but it's very much a 50-50 week to base wide receiver. So I'm not too fond of Nico Collins, and that's why, this is one of the lower tier wide receiver rooms. Now we'll move on to tight end. Your tight end, you went out and drafted George Kittle. So you go double 49er, and I don't necessarily hate it. 49ers offense is awesome. George Kittle, middle of the road tight end, honestly, because he's a roller coaster. 1 week he'll get you 22 fantasy points after 2 touchdowns because he'll get the red zone targets, or he'll get you 5 because he's just not being targeted and they're strictly using him as a blocker. That's what you get with the Shanahan offense, and week to week, you don't know what you're going to get. George Kittle, I think it's a good pick. You can put him in every week, and, obviously there'll be some bad weeks with George Kittle, but the good weeks are great. So for George Kittle, love the pickup for the Zestmeisters. Moving on to the flex position, you add your wide receiver 3 into the mix, which, honestly, I like the pickup. You go out and get George Pickens, honestly, the top receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's got, 2 new quarterbacks in the building, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, who I think, regardless of who's starting, I think the Steelers will try to get him the ball. Obviously, new offensive coordinator in the building who's going to want to run the ball a little bit more, but when they're going to air it out, George Pickens is the guy. Nobody else in that room is going to, make that much of a difference than George Pickens. We've seen when they get him the ball, he does phenomenal. This guy can do so much when the Steelers get him the ball that they need to do it more, and we'll see if this is the year, because George Pickens definitely has the potential to be the wide receiver 1 for this team if the Steelers consistently get him the ball. So I love this pickup of George Pickens as your 3rd wide receiver. Then we get to your special teams. You go out and get, honestly, in my opinion, one of the top defenses, the Ravens defense. Obviously, week 1 and a couple other weeks moving forward in the fantasy season, some tough games against some good offensive opponents. Obviously, they start the season against the Chiefs, but overall, this is a Ravens defense that you can pretty much plug and play every week and feel confident putting them out there because they're gonna force turnovers. So, love the defense. Then we go to your staple player. Every year, the Zestmeisters record a staple player, and it is Younghoe Koo. Their kicker every year since the beginning of the league has been Younghoe Koo. He is the staple of the Zestmeisters team, and he is back for another season, hopefully, to finally get the Zestmeisters into the playoffs, who have not made the playoffs. Rounding out the special teams is Brad Robbins, your punter, the punter for the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't know how much the Bengals are going to punt, so I don't know how helpful this is going to be, but that's your punter. We move to the bench, and it's not a terrible bench by any means. It's an okay bench, but it is definitely one of the bottom tier benches. Not a lot of great depth here, unless you get some of these rookies to really break out. The top guy on your bench is Jaylen Warren. So obviously you get one of the 2 running backs for the Pittsburgh Steelers, obviously Najee Harris being the other one. Jaylen Warren was more of the receiving back, and he had a lot of great potential last year, took a lot of good carries from Najee Harris. So who knows what we get from Jaylen Warren, but I don't hate him as your top guy off the bench. But once again, he's splitting carries. We don't know how the backfield's going to shape up, especially in a new offense. So don't know how to feel. You back it up with 2 wide receivers. You go Jaden Reed, which Packers wide receivers, obviously in the Packers wide receiving room, I feel like none of those receivers really stand out to me as the guy. So some weeks will have great weeks from Jaden Reed. Other weeks, not so much because Dobbs or Watson is doing better. So Packers wide receivers, I'm very 50-50 on. If you hit it on the right week, it's great. If not, And then you back it up with a Broncos receiver, really the top guy in the building, Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton, obviously more of a veteran wide receiver in Denver. I think, the rookie Bo Nix or even the younger Zach Wilson, whoever starts there in that room, will definitely lean on him. He's been a consistent guy that's going to eat up targets, especially with no competition in Denver. I don't mind the Courtland Sutton pick, but obviously he's buried a little bit on the depth chart. Then we move on. You went with a rookie, risky pick a little bit. You got Blake Corum, the running back out of Michigan, now a LA Ram. Obviously, he's behind Kyren Williams, who had an incredible season last year. And I know there's been speculation that Blake Corum is going to steal some of these snaps from Kyren Williams. Don't know if I'm bought in 100% on that. I think Blake Corum's got a lot to, work up to beat out Kyron Williams. But at the same time, I think there is potential there for Blake Corum to get an increased workload, especially if Kyron Williams goes down. So I don't hate the Blake Corum pick, but I also don't love it. He's definitely just a guy that's, going to sit on the bench unless, there's injuries or something else happens. Then we'll work down your bench a little bit farther. You go with the veteran wide receiver, and honestly now the third option in Seattle, Tyler Lockett. Obviously, you've had him a couple years now in fantasy football, and he's just, a consistent guy who will occasionally get that 20-point game, but otherwise he's going to eat up some targets. Now, granted, he's now wide receiver 3. I think JSN is slid up to that wide receiver 2 position, so does he lose some of those targets? Does he become less consistent? I think that possibility is there. Then we get your third string quarterback, and this was a choice. You went Drake May, and the news out of New England is he might not be the starter. He might not start week 1, so obviously you don't desperately need him with Kirk Cousins, Lamar Jackson, but obviously Drake May is not really the starter at this point. He's got some more developing to do, so once again, I don't hate the rookie quarterback being the third string, especially, because they can have a breakout year like CJ Stroud did and, really shine bright and it turns into a really great pick. But they can also be really bad like we saw Bryce Young last year. So we'll see how we deal with Drake May. Don't necessarily love, but definitely don't necessarily hate the pick. And then finally, rounding everything out, it's Chuba Hubbard, who honestly, I think is the lead back in Carolina. We talked about Jonathan Brooks in the last episode with the number 18 Grand Rapids Groundhogs. I think Chuba Hubbard's still the lead back, him or Miles Sanders in Carolina. I don't know where we got this idea that Jonathan Brooks was the guy, but Chuba Hubbard, I like him there. He, if the run offense is a lot better than it was last year, I think Chuba Hubbard could be a viable option to play at that flex, or if you really need it due to injuries, a running back 2 type of player. But I like the Chuba Hubbard pickup to end out your bench. And that concludes the Zestmeister squad here. So let's get into my predictions. So the Zestmeister's obviously coming into an AFC now with 2 teams that I consider below him, the Bunnies and the Groundhogs. Now granted, I have 3 AFC teams there. They could beat up on each other, or one of them could really take advantage of the other 2 and really win a bunch of those games. So a lot could change between this, but my floor for the Zestmeisters, obviously they've got a little bit more of an injury-prone lineup. CMC, Lamar Jackson, Kirk Cousins. So because a lot of your big players, there is some health issues. If that goes wrong, and obviously, the bench depth isn't great and you can't fill those roles completely, you're looking at a 3-11 season. I think that's, worst case scenario. But on the flip side, best case scenario, if everything goes well, I could see the ceiling for this team. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey stays consistently healthy and gets you 20 a game. Same with Lamar Jackson. And then George Pickens breaks out. Nico Collins is truly the wide receiver 1. Same with Chris Olave becomes, takes a step forward. This team is 9-5 for their ceiling. This is a team that could really shock everybody if things really go well. So we've got the floor, we've got the ceiling. Now, what does that leave my predictions? I've said predicting 2 teams at 5-9. I think the Zestmeisters find a way to get one more game either against the Bunnies or the Groundhogs. They finish 6-8 on the season. Obviously, it's not enough to get them into the playoffs, but they'll be right there, just knocking on the door. I really think this is an improvement from the last teams, and I really think it's just going to come down to how the Zestmeisters manage their roster week to week, if they can make some blockbuster trades to get better, or if they can, really hit well in the waiver wire. We'll find out. I think the bench could definitely use some improving to really help you get over the hump. But I really like, if all of these guys stay healthy, this lineup to really be close to getting in to the playoffs. It just comes down to how well this team can be managed. So that concludes today's episode. The number 17 in the Nathan Fantasy Football League preseason poll. It is the Zestmeisters, a team that has not made the playoffs yet. They are the lone team to be left out of the playoffs all 3 years. They are looking to change that. I think they've got a shot to make it in if, some things go right. If guys stay healthy and this lineup really, shines through. I think it if your bench can improve and the wide receivers, play better than I think they will, this could be a playoff team for the Zestmeisters. So let me know in the comments below if you agree with this take or if you don't agree, what you think of some of these players, and are you Team Zestmeister this year? Is this the year they make a run to the playoffs, or will they fall short once again? Next time out, we've got the number 6 team, my first team that I think makes it into the playoffs. 6 teams left, and before you know it, we'll be down to 1. But until then, have a good one, and we'll see you real soon with more Nathan Fantasy Football League updates.